The next step is to communicate our strategic priorities across these objectives. Here's the thing. The objectives we're looking at represent 100% of the organization's strategy. And by 100% of the strategy is everything the organization does. It's both the existing and ongoing processes and the initiatives you have at hand to change the organization, to make it better. And we should be able to deploy 100% of our resources, our people, our funds, our managerial focus across these objectives. And so we have to somehow or the other reflect to the organization what our current priorities are. An easy example here is if you think of bringing up your children. With your children, education is a high-weighted objective in their lives. They also should have fun. They should learn some sports. There's a bunch of other things they should do, but education is the highest-weighted objective. And we do that to our children because we want them to lead great lives. And we know the foundation for a successful life, in many cases, is a great education. So we weight the educational activities they do higher than other activities. The fair deal in organization is we communicate to everyone that same weighting across these strategic objectives. So in a typical leadership team, we ask them to sit down and debate the weights and finally reach an agreement about how important things are. Now, the dynamics of a leadership team are such that in reality, in truth, it's really a benevolent autocracy. The boss person has final accountability for the weightings, no different than you as a parent have final accountabilities for helping set your children's weightings, at least when they're young. So, although the leadership team should have a healthy debate on it, at the end of the day, it becomes a leader's choice about what the specific weighting is. And of course, the consequence of them getting it wrong is they're allowed to move on to another job. But that's their role. And they get exposed to more senior teams outside of your specific region of practice. They get exposed to stakeholders and a bunch of other things that in hopes gives them a broader perspective on the weightings. So ultimately, by the time we're done, we're going to be weighting these objectives. So in this example, I've put a high weighting, anything above 10%, on attract and develop the right people, promoting partnerships, develop and improving business practices with the goal of maximizing revenue and balancing financial responsibilities in aid of providing responsive services. So what I can begin to understand is that we don't give up working on influencing policy or enhancing public participation as seen by the public. But these other objectives are where the focus of our activities this year should be. And it is a bit like a game of chess. I mean, chess is strategy. The weighting of the piece varies during the game. So in this case, this organization, as I've built the model, is clearly focused on promoting partnerships and improving their processes. 35% of the strategy lies in those two objectives, ultimately in aid of providing responsive services. So it's an operationally excellent strategy that we're deploying. And the weighting will vary. I would hope that in this example, after a year or two of working with a high focus here, they will have achieved those better processes and maybe can focus more on stakeholder recognition and benefits from the work that they've done. In either case, the weighting begins to communicate to the organization the relative importance, and it becomes a service level agreement between the organization and the external stakeholders, and a service level agreement between the leadership team and the internal stakeholders. Now, there are other webinars at balancescorecard.net that will take you through some of the details around indicators. But a couple of points I want to make are as follows. First off, when we did our research at Harvard in conjunction with IBM, we discovered that the average leadership team looks at only 7% of the data that is collected when they make their leadership team decisions. So in this world, 93% of the data that's collected is not actually used and accessed by leadership team. So I'm convinced in organizations that inside of that 93% somewhere are great indicators to use in measuring your performance. We advocate strongly that you should never need to create a new indicator Just look in the organization to find something that exists already. Second, I'm using the word indicator as opposed to measure. Many of our public sector clients use absenteeism as an indicator of employee satisfaction. The concept is if employees are unhappy, they will tend to book off sick more. So it's an indicator of employee satisfaction. It's not terribly precise, but if that indicator turns yellow or red, like with your garage mechanic, we're going to show up with some diagnostic equipment, some focus groups and surveys and so forth to understand what the root cause is. But we get that data for free on a monthly basis. And so we can use that as an indicator of how the organization is meeting employee needs. So the idea of an indicator releases you from the need of a lot of detailed science. In fact, you'll see in this balanced scorecard on the screen, we don't even tell the reader what we're using to be indicative of how we're performing against that objective. Again, no different than the dashboard on your car. You don't really know what's getting measured that makes the check engine light go on. All you know is if it does go on, I should go to the process expert, and it's important. So the idea of a scorecard using performance indicators allows you to get this up and operational inside of literally a week. You have the strategy. All you have to do is get the leadership team to sit down and agree on the priorities and the strategy map itself, frisk the organization for the existing data, and you're good to go. Now, you don't have that diagnostic equipment beneath this, and we'll talk about that in the next module. So we've now created a good view of the current strategy that we can all agree to and begin to work towards. The final step of establishing the strategy as a starting point is to add performance metrics next to each of these strategic objectives. So in this example, the green indicator shows that we're performing our activities in support of providing responsive services up to target. Green means we're meeting target. And the small icon here, the minus sign, shows that and it's a level performance. A green dot with a red down pointing arrow shows that performance is decreasing this month over last, but we're still above target, at or above target. And a green arrow pointing up says we're at or above target and improving. Yellow means we're slightly behind target, but not enough that it's a crisis. And red shows that we're significantly behind a target. So almost like the indicator lights on the dashboard of your car, we can quickly provide leadership team with a very good view of how we're performing. And not only leadership, we can use this same dashboard for showing external and internal stakeholders without revealing private information or specific performance levels that we don't want the wider organization to know about. Red, yellow, and green is all we need to communicate. Now, in this case, if we were the leadership team and this were our scorecard, and we're trying to set the agenda for our meeting, we might mistakenly think the first thing we should talk about is enhancing community participation because the performance is red. But the debate here is, what is the importance of a red objective on a 5%er compared to yellow on a 20%er? This would be analogous to your child coming home and saying, I'm getting straight A's in school, the high-weighted objective, but one of the students doesn't like me that much. Well, you know what? That's not a highly weighted objective. You want to work on it, but it's not a crisis, compared to the opposite. Your child comes home and says, everyone at school loves me, but I'm getting an F in mathematics. Obviously a much bigger issue. So what the weighting and these performance indicators allow us to do is to get an aligned view of performance and where we as a leadership team should be focusing our time. This is what's generally known as a balanced scorecard. I'm balancing the performance against the near-term need to satisfy stakeholders and the longer-term needs of sustaining the environment and maintaining the community that we live in. So the balance is between near-term and longer-term. The balance is between financial and non-financial. And so what we're trying to do is help all stakeholders understand what our strategy is, how important it is, and how we're performing against it.